There is no delight the equal of dread. If it were possible to sit invisible between two people on any train, in any waiting room or office, the conversation overheard would time and again circle on that subject. Certainly the debate might appear to be about something entirely different, the state of the nation, idle chat about death on the roads, the rising price of dental care, but strip away the metaphor, the innuendo, and there, nestling at the heart of the discourse, is dread. While the nature of God and the possibility of eternal life go undiscussed, we happily chew over the minutiae of misery. The syndrome recognizes no boundaries. In bathhouse and seminar room alike, the same ritual is repeated, with the inevitability of a tongue returning to probe a painful tooth. We come back and back and back again to our fears, sitting to talk them over with the eagerness of a hungry man before a full and steaming plate. Before we jump into the story, we have to discuss Leo Valentine, the Birdman who danced with gravity.
All right.
Do you want to know about Leo Valentine, the Birdman who danced with gravity?
Sure.
Because you have to understand it. If you're going to understand anything, you're going to have to understand Leon Alfred Nicolas Valentine, a French birdman known as the most daring man in the world. Mm-hmm. He was a stunt guy, he was a daring do, he was a daredevil, and in 1956, he did his first exhibition in Liverpool, England, where he strapped a pair of balsa wood wings onto his arms because his whole deal was, I can fly with bird wings. And he apparently did. He would glide, he would strap himself to the underside of a plane, they would drop him, and he said he could fly for like 3 miles doing this. He was a pretty popular guy because this is what they did for entertainment in the early 20th century. And people would come from miles around to watch the Birdman sail through the air like a bird man. 1956, he does his first British appearance, and his wing accidentally hits the plane on his way out, and he plummets to the ground. His parachute gets caught up in his wooden wings, and he smashes on the ground, dying instantly in front of like 100,000 people. It's horrible, it's terrifying, and there was someone in the crowd that day who saw it happen, and his name was Paul McCartney of the Beatles, and he was there with his best friend, George Harrison of the Beatles. But that's not who we're talking about, because also in the crowd was a little boy who came to see it with his family named Clive Barker. Liverpool's own Clive Barker witnessed the death of the Birdman, and he said it was like the biggest influence on his life as a child.
I mean, watching someone plummet to their death after thinking they're going to fly is probably a pretty big thing.
And not as uncommon as one might think, I suppose, at certain points in history. I assume at certain points in history, if someone thought they were going to fly, you were most likely going to see somebody die.
I mean, it really depends, because it depends on where you are. How high can someone truly get from the ground at certain points?
I'd have to get pretty high if I was going to jump out of a plane, honestly. Even with a reliable parachute, I'm not jumping out of a plane.
No.
Yeah. So little Clive Barker saw the Birdman.
To skydivers.
Yeah, no offense. No offense if you are a daring do daredevil. No offense. You got more power to you. It's nuts, and I don't know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. The Birdman. So Clive Barker's little boy watches this happen, is like, I'm going to be a horror writer one day. And in the 1970s, he becomes the worst thing in the world, which is a theater person. And he writes many plays, including The History of the Devil, which is like the big one that people remember, like that still gets done, about the devil going on trial. He writes all these plays with a theater group that have a lot of like blood and guts and gore. It's kind of like the heyday of like alternative theater in England. And he then starts writing short stories because he's like, I think I just want to stick with this horror thing. Writes a ton of short stories, publishes them all as the Books of Blood, and which is like in 6 volumes, I think. And a little man named Stephen King reads these stories, and he says, I think this Clive Barker guy is the future of horror. splashes that quote on the front of Clive Barker's books, and he becomes an instant sensation in horror circles. He's the new future of horror. A movie is made called Rawhead Rex based on his short story Rawhead Rex. It's terrible, and he hates it. So he's like, from now on, I'm going to make my own movies. He takes a short story called The Hellbound Heart, makes it into a movie called Hellraiser, and the rest is history. Clive Barker becomes just a force to be reckoned with in horror. And the Books of Blood are kind of where it all started. I read these books many times over when I was a young man. I remembered reading Dread many times, and I remember thinking, hell, this is one of the best horror stories ever written. This is awesome. I went back and reread it this past week, and I don't know what I was thinking other than the fact that I was a stupid teenager at one point who didn't have much experience reading horror. This story is terrible. This story's terrible. It's poorly written. It's poorly plotted. It makes no sense, and it thinks it's making a point, but it's not. I would put this as worse than The Whimper of Whipped Dogs, in my opinion.
Damn.
I hated it.
At least The Whimper of Whipped Dogs wasn't all smarmy about it.
It
was a little smarmy about it.
The Whimper of Whipped Dogs,
but it wasn't like,
at least was trying to make a decent point about like, you need to, like, the city is it chews you up and spits you out. This short story is like, clown is gonna get you, I guess.
Well, I thought the point of the story was that everyone sucks, or specific people suck, and then they hurt people, and then everyone sucks.
I think the point of this story is vegetarians are afraid of meat. Because that seems to be kind of what Clive Barker thinks a vegetarian is a person who's terrified of meat and is so scared of it, they won't go near it, even if they're starving to death. Until they're driven insane and eat rotten meat, I guess. I guess that's the point. Also, being afraid of something and being made to deal with that thing will drive you so insane you forget who you are and you become an axe clown, I think, is the other point that Clive Barker's trying to make. I don't know. This story is stupid and I hate it. But before we go off on our opinions about it, this is The Dark Descent. The story's collected by David G. Hartwell. This is Medusa in the Shield, which is about psychological horror. And this is Dread by a young Clive Barker. The reason David G. Hartwell likes this story and likes Clive Barker's horror writings is he says basically that they are rough and unformed. This is a guy just at the beginning of his career learning how to write horror. There is a punk quality to it. Like these are all the writings of a young guy who's just making his place in the world of horror. And at the time, there was nothing, there was something kind of shocking and new about all of this. And he brought gross out body horror to the masses. I mean, Hellraiser was a popular movie, and we had never seen anything like it. So
he's the one who brought gross out body horror to the masses.
When I say to the masses, I mean like he made it palatable for mall audiences. They were like,
that's what I mean.
Yeah,
Clive Barker, go F yourself.
Now, to be fair to Clive Barker, these are young writings, and also he brought other things to the masses, like he made kink palatable in horror, like not as like something to be afraid of, but just like kink is a part of daily life. He brought sexuality and homosexuality to horror without it being a terrible thing, because Clive Barker is a very openly gay man himself, and he was like, gay people can be the leads in horror stories too, and they can carry a story, because his short story In the Hills, the Cities, which is an amazing story, its main two characters are a gay couple who are having a bad time, because that's Clive Barker. So to give credit where it's due, and I do love a lot of his work, it's just this story seems like, no offense to you, but it seems like it was written by a college student who's got some big ideas and doesn't, because it's about dread, but it ends up being about an axe clown. In any case, what's this story about?
Axe clown. It's about a jerk philosophy student or whatever.
Yeah.
Who's a psychopath.
But you repeat yourself. Jerk philosophy.
What?
Jerk philosophy
right.
student is redundant. Am I right?
Never met a philosophy student I had one philosophy like experience at my school, and
Mm-hmm.
I was a freshman. The philosophy teacher, the first thing, the philosophical conundrum they brought up to us was abortion, and I was like, please, why is this your introduction to us?
We're going to start with abortion and work our way up.
Yeah.
Strangely, abortion not mentioned in this story, although you think it might be.
It's about a guy who's using philosophy to excuse the torture of innocent people, basically.
Yeah.
That he wants
yeah.
to inflict upon people. He's like, I'm helping them.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I'm better than everyone, and I'm a jerk.
Yes. His name is Quaid.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a philosophy student, but he's also like 30-something. He's not even like a young guy. He's this 30-year-old guy. Nobody knows anything about him. He's not the main character. The main character is a young guy. Yeah, Steven. Steven's our main character. We kind of see everything.
He's referred to as Steve throughout the entire short story, except for like 3 times.
Right. It makes a big deal at the beginning of the story. You know you're in for trouble when the short story begins with a thesis statement. It begins with a thesis paragraph about dread, and you're like, oh no, like you got some big thoughts, don't you, Mr. Barker? But yeah, they meet at college. They're about 10 years difference. It also says that like the 80s were like this was an era of the cult leader. So you're sort of like, oh, I guess is this going to be about a dread cult? But it also isn't. Like I guess they're saying that like Quaid is charismatic, but also Steven seems to be aware of Quaid's like BS and like aware that Quaid's like in any case, he becomes fascinated by this Quaid guy who won't shut up about dread.
Yeah.
About how everyone's afraid of something and you gotta dig it up or something. And
yeah, because people just use buzzwords to make people interested in what they have to say.
Yes, the irony being
and dread is a buzzword.
Yes, not a BuzzFeed, but
not a BuzzFeed.
A buzzword. So they make friends with this. Yeah, they make friends with this young woman named oh god, I can't even think of her name. Rachel, Gretchen, Grushin, Garusa, Deriza. What's her name? Cheryl. It's Cheryl.
Cheryl?
They make friends with this. Yeah.
Well, they make friends.
Yeah.
She doesn't seem to like Quaid much either.
Right. It's that thing where it's like the person in college who talks a big game and sort of develops like a following. In this case, a following of 1 or 2. But yeah, like he insults. I also
just don't like the way they talk about Cheryl.
Yeah, he insults
really
her a lot, which seems to attract her to him. She starts hanging out with Quaid a lot. Let's just skip to what ends up happening in this story.
He basically, they go on vacation together. He locks her in a room for a month and starves her and forces her to eat meat. And then he's like, Steven, look at these pictures I took.
Yeah.
And Steven's like, what the hell is wrong with you? That's illegal. No, it's not. She didn't call the police, so everything's clearly she's happy with what happened.
Yeah, Quaid frames it as like, well, Cheryl and I talked about doing something like this, and so she had to know. And she was, I guess, like at one point she became, oh, this is Quaid doing this to me, because she's a vegetarian, which, like as I said up top, means she's terrified of meat. So he locks her in a room with like a leg of lamb or whatever, cooked meat, but she refuses to eat it until she gets so hungry she eats it after it's gone bad. There's also a lot of talk of her like bathing herself and pooping in a bucket, because not only is this about confronting someone with their fears or dread, it's about like humiliating them. Like,
well, yeah, because
also
he's not doing it for them. He's doing it because he gets some sick, twisted joy out of it.
Right, but yeah, and then Steven's like, "You're nuts," but then he's like drugged Steven's alcohol, and then Steven,
he's like, "I'll go grab some books for you," and Steven's like, "Okay." Yeah. I can't be in any danger here. What are you doing, Steven? Or Steve, or whatever your name is.
Steven has also admitted that he's terrified that he was in an accident when he was a kid and he lost his hearing for a while because of the concussion, and he became like trapped in his own like inability to hear. So his biggest fear is losing his hearing and being cut off from the world, being isolated from the world because he's lost his hearing. And so what does Quaid do to Steven?
I got a little confused at that point.
Oh, did you? Because what's going on in this story is pretty straightforward, but Barker writes around things quite a bit for no reason. And so, yeah, Steven is chained to a grid, like a metal grid in a silo or something. In he's at the he's in a silo, I guess. And it's pitch black. and Quaid straps a device to his head so he can't hear. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to, spoilers, he is strapped to this device for like a day.
Yeah.
Like a day. And what happens to him?
He goes bananas.
How bananas does he go?
Axe-wielding clown bananas.
He, for a day with, and sensory deprivation, yes. Horrible, yes. Kidnapped, yes. He understands what's happening, but he's also just like, I am now deaf and it's dark in here. I don't know who I am anymore. I'm completely insane. I'm a baby man. He becomes a baby man. Like, he's like, mama, mama, goo goo gaga. And then he gets set free and he's like, goo goo gaga, mama, mama. And he runs away and he loses his mind completely. And he gets put into a homeless shelter where he's a goo goo gaga baby man who poops himself. And he does. Like, he's like, I pooped my pants. I don't think this is how the mind works.
No.
I think even if you went a bit nuts because someone sensory deprived you, I think like after like a little time out of it, you'd be like, okay. Whew, I'm free. But then we figure out, we learned that
he's beat up by the police.
He does get beat up. Oh yeah, the worst cop in the world shows up.
Yeah.
But then he's like, the cop beats him up, but then he's like, goo goo gaga baby man. And the cop's like, oh man, I think this is actually a mentally ill guy. And that's when he sends him to like the homeless shelter, the halfway house.
Yeah, the cop just thought he was a protester.
A hippie
he
or
did.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah, he said, the kid hadn't started fighting back and calling for civil rights the way most of them did. Excuse me?
Yeah, Clive Barker's got a low opinion of cops. I mean, for what it's worth, that's fine. But
yeah.
Plot-wise, it's come on. He's literally a baby man. And so then there's this whole weird thing with Quaid having a bunch of photos of people who've been murdered by an axe. Mm-hmm. And Quaid's thing is that he's afraid of being murdered by a clown with an axe. That's his big dread. And that's kind of vague. We're never sure if this is something that actually, like, where did he get these photographs? We're never sure if this is something that happened to Quaid.
That's so vague, but it's also so very specific.
Yeah. Like, he's got photos of people who've been axe murdered, and he has nightmares about a clown coming after him with an axe. The end. It doesn't get more specific than that. And then in the homeless shelter, Steven is his clothes are all soiled, so they dress him in like mismatched clothes, and he's like, my goo goo gaga, I look like a clown. And then during a fight, he escapes. Before he escapes, he grabs an axe. Yeah. Because it's his friend.
Yeah, what does it say? It says,
I love that you're reading this.
The axe seemed to like being touched.
This is a writer who thinks they're awesome and thinks they understand how insanity works and thinks that this is, not only does he grab an axe, man, he thinks the axe is like talking to, like, none of this makes any sense. Absolutely none of it works as a story or as a character study or anything. But for those reading along at home, suddenly he looks clownish and he's carrying an axe. Where's he gonna go?
He's gonna go to his friend.
And do what?
He doesn't kill him.
No. He just chops him up.
Yeah.
That's the irony, I guess. Yeah, because he's like, I'm going to chop him up, but I know how to chop him up so that he stays alive and I can torment him. And I'm like, how do you chop someone up with an axe enough? Like, how do you surgically chop someone up with an axe so that they're, like, not dead? Or at least, like...
While you're a baby man.
While you're a baby man. But that's it. Like, that's how the story ends. And you're like, oh, I get it. Dread. What does this have to do with dread? Like, it's not even about people confronting dread. It's about people being, as you said, tortured. Like tortured. Like a Saw torture. Like, I'm trapped here and I can't leave until... But also the trap is like, she could get out if she just ate the meat. Which I'm not saying that makes what Quaid did right. But also, she knows how to get out of this room. But she's afraid of meat.
I actually looked up the movie to this one after I read it.
So did I. I have the movie now. I acquired the movie and I sort of like tripped through it. But before we get to that, I'm just going to say that if I was trapped in a room against my will and I was presented with something to eat that I did not like, something gross to eat that I did not like, raw insects or like, I don't know, like blood. I don't know. And they were like, you're not getting out of here until you eat the thing. I would be like, all right. And I would just eat the thing. Like, as gross or as off-putting or as personally offensive as it was, I'd be like, Bowl full of squirming maggots? Sure, fine. Just let me out of the room. I'll throw up later.
I actually don't think I could do it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You couldn't eat meat? You couldn't eat the meat?
If it was, I mean, I could eat meat, but if it was something else that, like, was personally offensive to me, I don't think I could do it.
Okay, if it was like a living baby, I probably wouldn't be able to do it. Or maybe a cooked baby.
No, but even if it was like cooked maggots, I couldn't do it. I know my limits.
If cooked maggots go bad, do they get maggots? Is
probably.
is it recursive, or are flies like, my
Let's
babies?
stop talking about this.
So I'm just saying that, like, it seems a lot to drive a person insane. The sensory deprivation we talked about, I'm like, okay, like, but I don't think that would drive you killer clown insane. I think it might
not immediately
cause a lot of PTSD, but like,
yeah.
And then I don't know why Quaid is afraid of clowns at all. Like, it doesn't go into it.
I don't know why clowns needed to be involved in this.
Now, you mentioned the 2009 movie Dread, which is an adaptation of this story. It's an hour and a half long. No one gets trapped in a room until there's only 30 minutes left in the movie. So the whole front end of this film is the relationship of Quaid, Steven, and what's-her-face, Cheryl. And they're all philosophy students together, or psychology students, and this is an experiment they've all set up. That's like the big difference. And they interview a bunch of people, and there's more people trapped in rooms. It's still Quaid. He's still a jerk. He still sets all this up. But there's more people with different fears. And Cheryl is afraid of meat because, of course, she was molested by her father and he smelled like meat. So that at least makes a little more sense. But
yeah,
it also ends with, it does not end with Quaid being killed by a clown boy. It ends with
they split up Steve's fear into someone else, right?
Yeah, yes. That's another guy who's afraid of the quiet, and they give Steven a completely different fear.
His like brother died in a car crash or something.
Yeah. And there's like a woman who has like a birthmark that covers half of her body, but like Quaid just humiliates her. Like, it doesn't even have anything to do with dread. Yeah. He just humiliates her, and she like tries to scrub the birthmark off, and it's terrible. There's also a lot of nudity in the movie. Like not like I'm trapped in a room and I'm naked. I have walked in and Quaid is painting a woman with large breasts, and so she's just in the scene for a while, sitting there naked with large breasts. Like, it's that kind of thing. Just like, I guess we got to have some nudity in here. It's a Clive Barker story. But how does the movie? I actually think the movie ends more intelligently than the short story, as far as like twist horror. How does the movie end?
He kills Steven and chucks his corpse into the room and tells Cheryl to eat it.
Right. He doesn't kill Steven. This other guy, Joshua, the guy the guy with the sensory deprivation thing, thinks that Steven was in on it, so he kills him with an axe. Yeah, and then Cheryl is left. Yeah. She's shut in the room with Steven's dead body, and that's the meat she has to eat, which is still terrible, and it doesn't make any sense, and the story is still awful, and the movie is bad. Like, I watched bits and pieces of it, and I'm like, it's only 90 minutes long, and I swear to God, the first 10 minutes felt like 30 minutes. Like, it's a lot of talking. It's all gray. It's just a miserable film. But it does at least end a little more intelligently than Axe Clown.
And at least it gives some motivations to the fears.
Right, except for the whole birthmark thing. Like, he just humiliates her. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to step away a bit then from its own, like, kind of smarminess a little bit, maybe. Just, it's like, yeah, this guy just sucks.
He does just suck. This is about a guy who sucks and hurts a lot of people.
Point is he just sucks, yeah.
Again, when I read this when I was a kid, or not a kid, like a teenager, I was like, rock on. Like, this is hardcore horror. And I can see where, like, early in the 80s, people were like, well, you know, like, this is where horror's going. It pulls no punches. But now it just seems like, I don't know. Did you know there was a comic book based on it?
That doesn't surprise me. I think that this story isn't about the plot or the characters so much as it is about the descriptions of stuff.
Yeah. Because you get,
like you said, gross out horror. I hate gross out horror. In fact, I don't really even consider it necessarily horror all the time.
Right.
I just consider it gross. I don't think everything that makes people uncomfortable is horror.
Yeah. I mean, horror is what it is. It's all subjective. But to me, this is what I call mean horror, which is just you're supposed to like get off on like bad things happening to innocent people, which I don't mind if that's an element of a story I'm reading. That bad things happening to innocent people is kind of the crux of a lot of horror. But I think we're supposed to get off on it. We're supposed to be like, ooh, like this is kind of gnarly and rad. And I'm like, no, it's just there's not enough there. And this is not a short story.
No, it's very long.
Yeah, it goes on for a while.
This is a novelette.
This is our novelette that we were pining for. And I don't know. I think that maybe it just speaks to just how different I am as a person now than I was back when I first read this.
I've never liked horror like this, to be honest. I think I prefer how this one ends just because the bad guy gets his comeuppance in the end.
Right.
I prefer how the story ends versus the movie. I see that. Movies that end like, oh, but the killer was the victor all along. Okay, great. Now I just feel sad.
So there've been movies and television adaptations of a lot of the Books of Blood. The Midnight Meat Train was turned into a movie called Midnight Meat Train, which is actually, I think, a pretty decent movie. The Yattering and Jack was an episode of Tales of the Dark Side. In the Hills, the Cities was turned into a comic. Well, a lot of these were turned into comics. Dread, obviously. There have been several adaptations in comics of New Murders in the Rue Morgue. Rawhead Rex, we mentioned. Just a lot of these stories. I believe The Last Illusion was changed into Lord of Illusions, and the main character of that, Harry D'Amour, pops up in a lot of Clive Barker's Hellraiser stories. So, Cabal was not part of the Books of Blood. That was its own separate thing, but that was turned into Nightbreed. So there's a lot of Clive Barker movies and stuff that are better than this.
Yeah, and I like some of Clive Barker's stuff. I appreciate the Hellraiser universe. I think it's kind of cool. Mm-hmm. I just don't like looking at it.
The weirdest Book of Blood adaptation, Books of Blood, there's 2 movies called The Book of Blood and one called Books of Blood, and they are both based on the framing device from the Books of Blood, which is a guy who gets cursed so that these stories all appear on his body, and which is kind of like the Illustrated Man from Ray Bradbury, but it's also just like 2 movies have come out that are like, this framing device is interesting, because the whole idea of Books of Blood is that you're then reading these stories on a man's body, and then it ends with another short story that sort of closes, like the last Book of Blood has On Jerusalem Street, which is about this guy then gets skinned, and these other guy ends up, the guy who skins him, I think, or something, like ends up being one of the stories. But it's a framing device, and there's, I don't know, they were like, we're going to crack this nut. We're going to figure out how to turn this bland framing device into a standalone motion picture. And they tried it, and neither of them are good. But
probably because it's not intended to be the story. The story is the other stories. The story is
the other stories. I know. It's weird to me. Body Politic was turned into an episode of Quicksilver Highway. Midnight Meat Train, Dread. That's Dread by Clive Barker. What'd you think?
There's a Criminal Minds episode very similar to this one.
Yeah, there's a movie series very similar to this called Saw that, as much as I dislike Saw, is better than this.
I like the Criminal Minds episode too.
You just love Criminal Minds. It's your favorite show.
I do.
You do. You're like, I'm not going to deny it. I love Criminal Minds. My mind is a criminal mind.
It's Clive not. Barker. I don't. It's a very inaccurate show. Does a lot of like criminal profiling. It has been proven to be not a thing. You shouldn't do it. It's inaccurate. It leads you down a lot of rabbit holes.
But it makes for a good show. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like Clive Barker too. I think, and I know that Clive Barker is a nice guy. A friend of mine from college corresponded with him throughout grad school, and Clive Barker said, "Hey, if you're ever in LA, come on down and talk. I can set you up with some stuff." And he moved to LA, and Clive Barker was like, "Hey!" And they maintained a professional friendship. And Clive Barker is apparently a very nice, very supportive man, very creative man. He's written children's books. He's also a visual artist. The guy does a lot. So check his stuff out. Mm-hmm. Also Candyman is based on one of his short stories. So Candyman,
that makes sense.
The guy's written some really good stuff, just not this story. Let it go. Let it go. And I don't think Guillermo del Toro would adapt this story. I don't think this is a Guillermo del Toro. He's not into this kind of mess. This is not a Guillermo del Toro delight. So let's let that go. But I'm going to ask you one question, and that is, Willow, what is our next short story?
Fall of the House of Usher.
Oh, are we going back in time, perhaps?
I don't know. I've never read this story.
Well, because this story that we read today was from the 1980s, and this is from the 1830s. So we
are going back in time.
We're tumbling back in time to the world of
about 150 years.
If I may say, Poe, Edgar Allan Poe.
I do love me some Poe. We didn't do an intro.
Well, we'll get to it at the end, because Poe, Edgar Allan Poe. Did I do that on this show once? Poe, Edgar Allan Poe? I did. I know I did. I did it when we discussed...
You did it, The Raven.
The Raven, yes. So I don't have to tell you what Poe, Edgar Allan Poe means anymore. Just know that it's related to junior high.
Okay. I'll go back and listen to our Raven episode to prep for this next one, I guess.
And you'll be Raven. Also, I think we did an anthology film we watched that had Edgar Allan Poe short stories as part of them. I don't remember what they're called. Yeah. I think Jane Fonda was in one. I don't remember much about it.
Oh, was it the one with the horse and the fire?
Yeah, I think that had Edgar Allan Poe involved. Am I right or am I wrong? We'll look it up later on. I do want to point out that I am uploading all of the Dark Descent episodes that we're doing to YouTube. So if you go to my YouTube page, Phil Gonzalez, there is a playlist now of Dark Descent of just the audio. You don't get to see us. But if you're one of the kind of people who likes to listen to things on YouTube, tell your friends, because it's about time. I had to replace the theme song. So that's what I've been doing, is meticulously replacing the music of our theme song with another version of the theme song, but one that does not get flagged by YouTube. So it's still In the Hall of the Mountain King. It's just a copyright-free version of In the Hall of the Mountain King. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining us. Go to YouTube. Go to Del Toro Time at Twitter. Go to It's Del Toro Time on Facebook. And next week, or next episode, The Fall of the House of Usher, a story that I've recently reread, and I can tell you right off the bat, pretty good story. So
yeah.
Usher House. Here we go.
I actually have read this story.
It's a classic. The House... It falls. Yeah. It's Usher.
Or I was supposed to read this story for a class, and I didn't. That's what it was.
Well, here's your chance. And when you read it, you can write to your teacher and say, guess what I finally did? And you'll let me know all about the interaction. But until we talk about Willow's failure to read The Fall of the House of Usher, I am Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And we'll see you when it's Del Toro time.
No, intro. Wait, hang on.
Because it was Del Toro time.
No, yeah, but we have to record the intro.
Oh, we still want to do that? Well, then I'm Phil.
No, you know what? Never mind.